What happens when aggression meets discipline? A lesson these bikers won't forget. It was a breezy Saturday evening at a small park on the edge of Fairfield, Connecticut, the kind of evening where families gathered, kids played soccer, and teens lounged on benches, earbuds in, lost in their screens. 16-year-old Michael was one of them. He sat beneath a tall oak tree, his posture relaxed, but his mind sharp. His younger brother Jordan was finishing up soccer practice, and Michael had promised their mother he'd wait and walk him home. Dressed in a fitted suit with a crisp white shirt and polished shoes, he looked out of place among the casual weekend crowd. But Michael didn't mind. He wasn't here to fit in. He was here to keep a promise. With a book in hand, he flipped through the pages, the words absorbing him more than the chatter and laughter around him. Then came the sound. A low, guttural rumble cut through the air, growing louder by the second. Michael knew that sound. Motorcycles. The kind that made heads turn, except tonight they made the air feel heavier. The bikers didn't just pass through. They rolled in, slow and deliberate, parking their bikes near the soccer field. 5 of them. Leather jackets, dark jeans, boots that scuffed against the pavement with every step. They weren't here for the view. Michael didn't have to look up to feel their eyes on him. But he did, just for a second, long enough to catch their stares. Cold, measured, calculating. His stomach tightened, but he didn't let it show. Years of discipline had taught him better than that. He exhaled, turned a page in his book, and waited. Whatever was coming next, he would be ready. He forced himself to stay calm. But calm doesn't last long when you're being watched. The bikers didn't stay by their bikes. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head, nudged his friend before breaking away from the group. His heavy boots struck the ground with purpose, each step a quiet threat. Michael felt the vibrations in the earth before he saw him. Glancing up, he found the burly biker flanked by 2 others. Their expressions were unreadable, but their intent was clear. They weren't just passing through. They were here for something, or someone. Him. The men moved in sync, their leather boots crunching against the gravel pathway as they closed the distance. Michael's heart thudded in his chest, but his face remained calm. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Never let them see you sweat. He exhaled, dog-eared the page of his book, and set it aside. The burly man stopped a few feet away, arms loose at his sides, but there was nothing casual about the way he stood. "What are you doing here, kid?" His voice was gruff, direct. Michael hesitated, his brows knitting slightly in confusion. "Waiting for my brother," he replied simply, his tone polite but firm. The man smirked, exchanging a glance with his friends. "This doesn't look like your kind of place." "Out of place," the man said, his words laced with something unspoken, but pointed. Michael's jaw tightened, though he forced himself to remain composed. "It's a public park," he answered, meeting the biker's gaze without flinching. The smirk on the man's face faded. "Got a smart mouth, huh?" he muttered, stepping closer. The other 2 shifted subtly, spreading out just enough to form a loose semicircle around Michael. A quiet trap. Parents and kids were still scattered around the park, but no one seemed to notice the tension brewing beneath the oak tree. Michael scanned the area briefly, hoping for a passing glance, a curious look, something. But the bikers had chosen their moment well. Most eyes were on the soccer field where Jordan's game was wrapping up. Michael's mind raced. He wasn't scared. Not yet. But the situation was shifting, the undercurrent of danger undeniable. Years of karate training had taught him to observe, anticipate, and react. But he also knew discipline. Fighting wasn't the answer. Not unless it had to be. "It was the last look," Michael said, keeping his tone measured. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just here for my brother." But the burly man didn't back off. Instead, he leaned in slightly, just close enough to invade Michael's space, his breath heavy with smoke and something sour. "Trouble," he murmured, his voice low and taunting. Who said anything about trouble? Michael could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken challenge in their posture. His hands rested loosely on his knees, but he was ready if it came to that. He didn't want to fight, but he also wasn't about to back down. Then the biker smirked, and with a sneer he made it clear they weren't going to let him off so easily. "Maybe you should show us what you've got." A quiet chuckle rippled through the group behind him. Michael didn't move. He didn't flinch. His hands stayed where they were, resting calmly on his knees. But his eyes stayed locked on the man in front of him, unwavering. Years of training had taught him how to read people. The way they stood, the way they shifted their weight, even the rhythm of their breathing. It all told a story. And these men? They weren't here to talk. The burly man, clearly expecting Michael to fold under the pressure, leaned in closer, his shadow stretching over him. "What's the matter, kid? You scared?" he taunted. Michael exhaled slowly, not answering right away. Fear wasn't the issue. Fear had never been the issue. His real problem was time. How long until Jordan's game ended? How long until someone in the park noticed what was happening under the oak tree? The tension thickened, pressing in like a storm about to break. Then, "Leave him alone." The sudden voice cut through the moment like a blade. Michael turned his head slightly, his stomach dropping as he saw a young boy standing a few yards away. Jordan. Sweat still glistened on his forehead from the game, his fists clenched at his sides. His little brother had wandered off the field, straight into the worst possible situation. Michael's pulse quickened. "Jordan, stay back," he called, his voice firm. But the bikers had already turned, their grins widening like predators spotting an easier target. "This your brother?" one of them asked, pointing a gloved finger at Jordan. "Maybe we should teach you both a lesson." Michael felt something stir deep inside him. Not fear, something else, something sharp, something dangerous. And if these men wanted a lesson, they were about to get one. Michael stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving the group. He shifted his weight slightly, planting his feet in the stance he had practiced countless times in the dojo. "Don't touch him," Michael said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The burly man laughed, shaking his head. "Look at this guy, thinks he's tough." The others joined in, their laughter echoing across the park. But Michael didn't waver. His expression didn't change, his stance didn't shift. And that silence, his unwavering stillness, unnerved them more than he realized. "You're not gonna do anything," one of the bikers scoffed, stepping closer. Michael finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "You don't want to do this." The laughter died instantly. The bikers exchanged quick glances, momentarily thrown off by the confidence in his tone. But the moment didn't last. The burly man took another step forward, raising a hand to shove Michael. What happened next was so fast, so unexpected, that even the bikers weren't ready for it. But Michael was. As the biker's hand shot forward, aiming for his shoulder, Michael shifted, smooth, precise, like a spring released. The man's shove met nothing but air. Off balance, the biker stumbled slightly. Michael didn't hesitate. With one fluid motion, he stepped in, his open palm striking the man's wrist and twisting it away with practiced precision. A sharp grunt of pain escaped the biker's lips as his arm jerked downward, his hand instinctively retreating to his side. He stepped back, eyes flashing with fury. "What the—" the man started, but before he could finish, Michael spoke. "I warned you," he said, his voice calm but firm. The two other bikers tensed, and in that moment, they understood. This wasn't going to go the way they had planned. The bikers rushed forward, clearly not taking the warning seriously. The first swung a wild punch. Michael ducked, effortless, controlled. His movements were smooth, deliberate. In an instant, he countered with a sharp kick to the man's knee. A sickening crack echoed through the air as the biker crumpled to the ground, a cry of pain escaping his lips. The second man hesitated, a split second of doubt. It was all Michael needed. Pivoting on his heel, he delivered a spinning kick to the side of the biker's ribs. The impact landed with brutal precision, knocking the wind out of him. The man staggered backward, clutching his side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. By now, the burly leader had recovered. His face was red with anger, his fists clenched tight. With a furious growl, he lunged at Michael, swinging wildly like a street brawler. But Michael didn't meet brute force with brute force. He stayed light on his feet, slipping past the punches with the kind of agility that only came from years of disciplined training. Every movement was purposeful, every dodge calculated. And then, something shifted. A crowd had begun to form at the edge of the park. Parents, kids, even soccer players had stopped mid-game to watch. Someone had pulled out a phone, the lens capturing every second of what was unfolding. The leader charged again, this time with a new strategy. He reached for Michael's lapel, trying to grab hold of his suit jacket. But Michael moved faster. Twisting out of his grip, he stepped in and delivered a precise strike to the man's solar plexus. The impact was devastating. The biker staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat, his body momentarily frozen from the shock of the blow. And for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The biker gasped for air, his tough exterior cracking under the weight of Michael's calm control. "Enough," Michael said, his voice cutting through the tension, loud enough to echo across the park. His stance remained strong, unwavering, but his expression held no malice, only resolve. "I don't want to hurt you. Walk away." For a moment it seemed like the bikers might listen. The leader wheezed, still clutching his chest, his glare sharp but uncertain. His two companions remained on the ground, one gripping his knee, the other pressing a hand to his ribs, their breaths labored. The tension in the air was thick. Michael didn't flinch. Finally, the leader exhaled sharply, his jaw tight with frustration. "Let's go," he growled, waving at his crew. One by one they limped back to their bikes, muttering curses under their breath as they fired up their engines. But just as they began to pull away, the leader turned back. He pointed a finger at Michael, eyes burning with fury. "This ain't over, kid," he spat. Then, with a deafening roar, they were gone, their engines fading into the distance. Michael didn't respond. He stood there, breathing steady, his focus unshaken. Around him, the crowd erupted into applause, murmurs of admiration and disbelief rippling through the park. But Michael didn't acknowledge the cheers. His eyes had already found what mattered most. Jordan, standing just a few feet away, staring up at him with a mixture of awe and relief. And in that moment, Michael knew. This was far from over. Jordan ran up to Michael, his eyes wide with both fear and awe. "Michael, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Michael knelt down, resting a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. "I'm fine," he said, offering a small smile. "Let's go home." But as they walked away, Michael couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't over. Not yet. The brothers moved in silence, their sneakers tapping softly against the pavement. The night air was crisp, but the weight of what had just happened lingered between them. Jordan kept sneaking glances at Michael, his expression torn between admiration and worry. Finally, he couldn't hold it in any longer. "Michael!" Jordan's voice was barely above a whisper. "How did you do all that? I mean, They were huge, and there were 3 of them. Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not about being bigger, Jordan," he said. "It's about being prepared, staying calm, knowing when to act." Jordan frowned, his small hands gripping the straps of his backpack. "But what if they come back? That guy said it wasn't over." Michael stopped walking. He turned to face his little brother, his expression serious but steady. "If they do, we'll handle it," he said. "But listen to me, Jordan." His tone softened, but his words carried weight. "What happened today wasn't about fighting. It was about standing up. For myself and for you." He exhaled slowly. "But violence isn't the answer, unless it's the only option." Jordan nodded slowly, absorbing his brother's words. Michael placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "Remember, it's not about proving how strong you are," he said. "It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take that away from you." Jordan didn't respond right away, but his eyes held understanding. By the time they reached home, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow over their house. Their mother stood waiting at the door, arms crossed, a concerned look on her face. "You're late?" she said, her voice tinged with worry. Michael hesitated, glancing at Jordan, who stayed silent. "Something happened at the park," Michael admitted, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want to worry her more than necessary, but he also believed in honesty. As he recounted the events, their mother's expression shifted from fear to something else. Pride. She listened intently, lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes glistened. Emotion filled their mother's eyes as she placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. "Michael," she said softly, "I'm proud of you for protecting your brother and yourself. But promise me one thing." She met his gaze, her voice steady but full of concern. "Don't ever take risks like that unless you have no other choice." Michael nodded. "I promise," he said, and he meant it. That night, as he lay in bed, he replayed the events over and over in his mind. The bikers' aggression, the crowd's reaction, and the leader's parting words. "This ain't over, kid." But Michael wasn't afraid. He had learned long ago that fear only had power if you let it. Instead, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. The world wasn't always fair. But moments like this proved that courage and discipline could make a difference. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just a test of his skills. It was a reminder that standing up against wrong, no matter how daunting, was always worth it. The lesson behind the story. Michael's story is a powerful example of resilience, preparation, and knowing when to take a stand. His calm confidence in the face of adversity reminds us that true strength isn't about size or intimidation. It's about knowing your worth and acting with integrity. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. How can you stand up for yourself or others in difficult situations? Because courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing, even when fear is present. Like this video if you found inspiration in Michael's story. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their inner strength. Subscribe for more powerful stories that prove one thing: sometimes the quietest voices leave the strongest impact.